for being with us this morning, and thank you, Jesse, for the introduction, and also for helping me get onto this stage, which is not so easy as a short person. If you were in Fariba's keynote about sisterhood, that's what she's talking about. Thank you, Jesse. So I want to first of all apologize because I'm not Jenny, who is supposed to be on the agenda today. I'm going to do my best to make it up for you. Jenny couldn't be with us today, so instead I'm going to be sharing with you about how designers are shaping the new reality when it comes to emerging technology. Jess did a great job introducing me, so I'm going to move quickly, but just a little bit about me. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, home of country music, but I've been living here in the Bay Area for the last 6 years. I have 3 cat children and 1 human child. I love reading and writing, and perhaps most importantly, I'm very passionate about equity and social justice, and how can we leverage technology and design to make the world a better place. So before we really get started today, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about these words, creativity and innovation. Anybody want to shout out, what does creativity mean to you? Unique. Okay. Yeah. What else? What does it mean to be? What does creativity mean for you? It's okay if it's a negative connotation too. Different. Great. Out of the box. I love it. And what about innovation? Yeah. Kind of charting uncharted territories, right? Yeah. So I imagine that you're here today partly because you care about creativity and innovation. As women in technology, these are some of the areas that we're really entrusted with and tasked with. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about creativity and innovation. I think we all love to talk about the exciting side that we all feel passionate about, that part that lights us up inside. But there are some things that we also need to be aware of when it comes to innovation and the responsibility that we wield as creatives or as anyone that's working in the field of design and innovation. And if you actually start to look at this, here's what's interesting. If you ask Americans what they think of emerging tech, now this study is from this is from the end of 2020, so granted, not exactly our most optimistic moment as a country, right? But take a look at this. The sentiment in blue on the left, these are the percentage of adult Americans surveyed who believe that this emerging technology will have a positive influence on society. On the right, in the red, these are the percentage of US adults who believe that these emerging technologies will have a negative effect on technology. And if you go all the way down to the bottom of this list, you're going to see some of the very same things that are used as buzzwords and people hang a lot of their hopes in the technology and creative fields today. NFTs, metaverse, cryptocurrency, hilariously lab-grown meat, people think is going to be a net negative for society, right? So why is that? I think what I want to ask you to think about today, when you think about emerging technologies, when you think about what it means to innovate, what are the feelings that accompany that? Because whether we acknowledge that or not, the underlying emotional associations that we have with any given emergent technology is going to wildly shape how much we fight for it, advocate in it, play in it, are willing to even exist or be literate around it, right? And think about what influences you to have the emotional association that you do. Maybe you feel excited by emerging technologies. Maybe you feel scared. Maybe you feel a little bit of both, or maybe it changes depending on the technology that you're talking about. So pay attention throughout this talk today, anything that we discuss, pay attention to not just what do you think about it, what is the smart thing that you're thinking of that you're going to say in your next meeting. How do you feel? What underpins those emotional beliefs that we hold? Okay, so I think what we maybe need to ask ourselves about technology and innovation is, are we really in a new moment in history? It seems, perhaps on the surface of it, obvious that we are, right? Whoever heard of metaverse in the past? Whoever heard of non-fungible tokens? What's becoming possible due to emerging technology certainly presents a new moment. But our reactions to that actually go back pretty far into history. Let's take a look. a very early skeptic about emerging technologies, okay? Plato wrote, ironically, back in 370 BC, that writing, which was at the time a very emergent technology, is a step backward for truth. So his fear, which actually sounds very similar to a lot of people's fears about emerging tech today, is that by having one remove from a face-to-face intimate conversation, by having a way to record that or write it down, you actually are taking a step back from being connected as human beings. You actually are going away from truth, from connection, from what it means to be human. That was his fear. Thankfully, he wasn't so afraid that he didn't write it down so we could study it and see the trend historically. Okay, let's take another look. This is one of my personal favorite examples of skepticism about emerging tech. This is from a New York Times editorial in 1897. It says, "We will soon be nothing but transparent heaps of jelly to one another." Any guesses about what technology this was in response to? Come on, throw it out there. What was that? Papers? It was actually about the telephone, right? So prominent skeptics of the day worried that by having a way to communicate, divorced from the physical reality of our bodies, we would lose the sense of one another's humanity. But it continues. Charlie Chaplin, one of the most famous early actors, believed himself that the cinema was just a fad, that there was nothing real there that could hold people, that could grip them, that could move them. He said that what audiences really want is to see flesh and blood on the stage. It's interesting, right, that even someone who was at the forefront of this emerging art form of cinema was so doubtful about its ability to impact or move people. Let's move a little bit more into modern times, and this is another great example. Thomas J. Watson, the chairman and CEO of IBM in 1943, believed that ultimately his company was not going anywhere. He believed that there was a world market for about 5 computers, that it was never going to be something that would impact the day-to-day of people's lives. Thankfully for him and his descendants, he was wrong. Okay, so here's the thing. All these examples go to show that reactionism, skepticism, fear, negative emotions about the potential impact of emerging technologies, none of this is new. This is the grain of humanity over time to react against what is unknown and what is new. And there are good reasons for that evolutionarily. We want to go to what's comfortable, to what makes sense, to what we know we can trust. Ed Day is a sociologist at Chapman, and he explains that we're hardwired to fear the unusual rather than the normal. Ed goes on to explain and asks us to examine, again, not just the feelings that we have about emerging tech, but why do we have those feelings, right? So one of the things that comes up when there is something that is new, that is unusual, that is unknown, that is untested, is that these then are things that we don't feel in control of. And the reality is we're not. He gives the example that driving is statistically, objectively, a very dangerous thing to do. Driving. But how many of us drive on a daily or at least 2 or 3 times weekly basis? Yeah. Driving is dangerous, but we don't feel the danger. Why? Because we have the illusion of control. We feel like we're the one driving it. So the question that I want to ask you today, who's driving when it comes to emerging technologies? Who's driving? If you feel out of control, if you feel scared, if you feel this negative reaction about emerging tech, the odds are it's because you don't feel that you have any control or any voice about what's happening. If you feel confident, if you feel in charge, if you feel excited by the possibilities, odds are good that that is because you are in a position of influence. You believe that you're going to benefit from these tech. You believe that you have a voice in how they're going to be used. Okay? So the question that we have to ask ourselves is not actually, should we embrace a new tech? Should we not? Should we ignore it? It's, let's look at who's driving and how do we make sure that that driver is creating a world that's more equitable for all of us. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by emerging tech. As you saw in the graph, this can be applied, this is a huge term, this can mean anything from impossible burgers to NFTs to the metaverse to DAOs to GNRs, you name it. So I'm going to talk about 4 specific types of emerging tech today. But I want you to think about this premise and think about whatever that emerging tech is that has gotten a foothold in your mind, in your imagination. Whatever it is that you're dealing with at work, in your personal life, that you think about emerging tech, this premise probably can be applied there. I'm going to talk about what I know better, okay, which is these 4. This is the area that I consult with my clientele. So what is the metaverse? The metaverse, honestly, is at its most basic form, it's a concept for a persistent universe of virtual worlds. It can be accessed through headsets. A lot of people think of the Oculus, right? Which don't even get me started on the negative reaction to Oculus and the visceral way that hits people, right? But essentially, the metaverse, it's a persistent concept of universe of virtual worlds, and what it does is it allows people to have real-time interactions and experiences across physical geos. The reality is, guys, we've all been using the metaverse for a few years now. If you use Slack, if you use GChat, if you use Microsoft Teams, you're already operating in the metaverse. It just might not be this cool, out there, wild kind of metaverse. Usually when people talk about the metaverse, they're talking about Decentraland. They're talking about a really high cost to entry to purchase real estate. And they're talking about something that is really still very experimental and undefined. Okay. Virtual reality. This is another example. This one really is almost entirely still accessed through a headset. Why is that? It's because this idea of truly immersive 3D technology, it requires the visual equivalent of our actual vision. So you need to be able to see, what you would see from your left eye, from your right eye, and you need to operate through that. So it's typically operated by hand controls. You see this more with experiences, games, training, education, and sports. Today, you're probably not going to see this in people's homes very often, unless they're an enthusiast. You're probably going to see this in conferences. You're probably going to see this at a booth. Maybe you've seen, if you've ever been to one of those big conferences in Vegas and they have kind of like a cattle corral and they've put pillows and things so people don't fall down and hurt themselves, and then they put a headset on and you see them and they're what's going on there? Virtual reality is going on. But there are, as you can see in this example, there are some really exciting possibilities for training in what would otherwise be very dangerous situations. Surgeons, right? Simulating undergoing a dangerous and delicate surgery, or maybe it's firefighters training on how to navigate a specific area, or bomb threat control. It does present some really exciting possibilities. Virtual experiences themselves, Alex, if you want to play the reel, this is basically where you take a digital twin of a physical space. So you could imagine that this ballroom itself, you've kind of digitized that, right? And then you can augment that with UI and UX design, and you can put anything over it. So a field guide, a map. This is a project we did for Starbucks. You can embed that within a landing page, but you can have 3D models of buildings that you can then go inside and dive. Okay, now I'm going to go into this floor. This is one we did for Matterport and NASDAQ. You can have things that are, for example, in an architectural feature of the physical space, you can embed as if there's a video playing or something that can be opened and explored and interacted with. This was one we did recently for Tory Burch. Just kind of a digital way to explore what might otherwise be inaccessible. Not everybody gets to go to New York and go to Tory's flagship store on Mercer Street, but thanks to this technology, you can. Some of it is commercial, some of it is brand storytelling. There's a lot of different ways that this can be used. You get the idea. Let's go ahead and go back to this slide, but this is another type of virtual reality that you can play with. Interestingly, the world of architecture and design has been ahead of this. They've been using this for a long time to be able to switch textures and colors and simulate the way things would look. This can be expandable to virtual reality. You can make this explorable in a headset as well, but just another kind of category of this emerging tech. So here's the thing. With all those that we've gone over, I believe that design is the common thread about who is influencing it, who's driving the experience. Let me explain why. In each of these, you have someone that is creating and curating the experience, right? It's never just an objective, here's a space and I'm in it and now I'm going to explore the world. No, there are always biases. There are always things that your attention is being drawn to. There's always someone that is telling the story. So if it is virtual reality, that story may be built in a programming language, right? Okay, we're all familiar with this. This has been going on for a long time. It's developers that are building the world around us, right? Well, more and more those programming languages, like Unity and Unreal, are visual. So what that means is that a designer is now being asked to act as a developer. The designer is designing and building in the same moment. Developers are being asked to think like designers. They can't escape it. They're coding and seeing the experience at the same time. There's no getting away from the fact that design is now more and more present in the way these emerging technologies are being shaped. Even in the last example that you saw of virtual reality that's built on top of a model of a physical space, who's telling that story? Who's telling you, look, here's the next thing to look at. Here's the next hotspot to open. Here's what your user experience is like, guiding you through that. What I would ask you to consider is that designers are in an extremely powerful seat when it comes to shaping emerging technologies. There are some obvious ways that this is true, right? Even if we think about existing tech that's been around for a long time, a website, a brochure, someone is choosing the photos on that, right? Someone is saying, who are the people that this is for? And if those people all look the same way, guess what? That product and brand is going to speak to those people. That's also true for less obvious things. So in emerging tech, micro interactions. How do I access this menu? What does that look like? These are going to become more and more powerful as an influence of saying, who are these technologies accessible to? Who are they for? Who are they inclusive of? Design has that power, and of course, we also have that responsibility. So I'm talking about the whole spectrum of design when I talk about how powerful it is, right? This can be something like validating your strategy or creating your brand. It can be something like zooming out and thinking about your customer journey across all touch points of your company. It can be traditional product design, user research, user experience design. It can also be experience design in the sense of virtual experiences and emerging tech. In each of these, design is playing a very powerful role about who is it for and how do they relate to what's being created. If you don't believe me, I want to use an example, okay? Imagine that you are standing in front of a door. You've just gone over to, let's call it, it's your crush's house, right? Maybe it's the first time you're going to meet your crush's family. You are not going to just let yourself in. You want to be a little more formal. You're going to ring the doorbell. Which finger are you going to ring the doorbell with? Raise your hand if you're going to ring it with your forefinger. Yeah? What about your thumb? Anybody's going to? Yeah. Okay. All right. So there's research that shows that if you are someone who is digitally native, if you grew up from before the age of 12 with a smartphone in your hands, what does that hardware design look like? It looks like this, right? We use our thumbs. We use our thumbs for everything. So if you are under that age, if you grew up with a smartphone, statistically, you're going to ring a doorbell like this. You're not going to ring it like this, which is kind of mind-blowing to people my age. Like, really? You're going to use your thumb for that? Okay, but that's an example, right? So whether it's a digital design or a physical hardware design, it's shaping your behaviors. It's shaping your neural networks about how things work. So I would posit that design is actually very powerful, and I'm not the only one who thinks this. Alice Rawsthorne, in a recent article for The Atlantic, wrote that design is one of the most powerful forces in our lives, whether or not we are aware of it. And it can also be inspiring, empowering, and enlightening, okay? Designers have been saying this for a long time, guys, but what's new? What is new? Now we have research that backs this up. We have the example of the thumb and forefinger. We have the example that design decisions are actually shaping behaviors and shaping beliefs. So you can see this in small children. Anybody has kids? Yeah? Okay, so if you see your kid, you know there's that phase when they're like between 9 months and 2 years old that they just get obsessed about something and they want to do the same thing over and over and over again every day. My son Arthur is 20 months old, and for him right now, the thing that he's obsessed with is fans. So every morning, he gets up, he wakes up, and he's like, opens his eyes, looks around, and goes, fan, 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 fan. We do the diaper, we do the milk, and then he runs to the room next door, and he turns on the fan and looks at me like, fan, are you seeing this? It's a fan. Do, 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 do. And then what's happening there is that like his neural network is being formed. He's reinforcing, he's moving through the same routine every day. He knows that when he goes around that door, there's a fan. If he pushes a button, it's gonna go do, 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 do. It's gonna blow air. It's gonna be really exciting for him. And that's how we learn. That's how our beliefs about anything are shaped, is by repetition and by the space that we move through and how that space is structured. So this is actually from the Gunn School of Business at Harvard, okay? So look at what they've done here. After that research came out that showed how influential the design of space is, they redid their entire school of design. So what they have here, it's an open concept. The stairs kind of weave through what they call the trays. So designers are here, they've got their projects, and they found that after 2 terms, students were having more organic conversations. They reported that they were more creative because the space that they moved through, they were just absorbing. They were listening to little snippets of conversations. They were seeing someone's project here and there. So this kind of gave them an insight that the space you move through actually has powerful to make you more positive, more creative, more innovative. If it's good enough for Harvard, I think we can trust that research. But if you're still not convinced, let's take the medical profession. Anybody here works in healthcare or medical? No? Okay, let me speak freely. Those guys are very scientific. They're not really wishy-washy, soft-feely people, right? If they are adopting this, we have good reason to believe this is true. They have been paying attention to research that shows that if your view from your hospital room looks out onto nature, trees, grass, mountains, you name it, you're going to heal faster and you're going to make a more complete recovery. This is so powerful that even if you're looking at a picture of nature, even if you're looking at a color that occurs in nature, there are correlations to your ability to heal and to heal more completely. So we see this is the Boston Children's Medical Center. They've incorporated natural elements into the lobby. It's not just to make the kids feel more comfortable. It's actually because this contributes to their healing process. Okay, so this is true in digital spaces as well. And I want to take the example of Tiffany. I am a very big brand fan of Tiffany, and this is not a hint, my husband, I'm just saying. They're great. But here's why, okay? If you think about luxury, that's an area that traditionally has been quite exclusive. Almost definitionally so. We've said luxury is a space for wealthy white women, wealthy white straight women, actually. But Tiffany, from very early on, has been running ads of gay couples, of people of color. They've made it intentionally a more inclusive brand space. And they actually really even built on this further in their holiday campaign from last year, which I absolutely adored. They had a campaign with Beyonce and Jay-Z. They took the classic Moon River song from the original Breakfast at Tiffany, and they redid it. And it was incredibly beautiful. And there are layers and layers here, right? So pretty much everybody knows the Queen. We all know that's Beyonce. We all know Jay-Z. But the art behind there, what do you notice about that immediately? Anybody know who did this art? Basquiat, that's right. So, okay, yes, it's Tiffany blue, but it's also art by another person of color from New York. So they've done this, and these are the kind of decisions that send a very clear message about what is Tiffany, who is it for, and they're working toward this new vision of inclusive luxury. They're redefining that by design decisions that are as simple as what is the art in the background and who are the spokespeople, right? So what I want to suggest here is that in digital spaces where people are spending more and more time, that is the same thing. That is the same case, right? If not more so. If you look at how many hours a day you have on your screen time, which by the way is not your screen time, it's your phone time, Most people are averaging over 3 hours a day. That's a really big part of our lives, where we're absorbing information that shapes how we feel about life, how we feel about other people, what it means to be human. So again, who's driving that? I think it's designers. This is a huge responsibility. Now, emerging technologies are not going away, however we feel about them. I have a confession to make to you guys. I am a technophobe. I am 100% technophobe. I procrastinate updating the software on my phone. I consistently forget my passwords. I can't unlock my computer like half of the time. So what the hell am I doing as a consultant on emerging technology to the Fortune 100? Well, it's just this, is that when you kind of embrace what is there, what is coming, you can create a new relationship with it. Anybody's ever been skydiving or parasailing or extreme sports, anything like this? Okay, that thrill that you get, it's the same thrill. It's because you're scared of it that you can have a powerful and transformative experience. And that was my experience with tech, was that what I do know, what is comfortable for me, what I love is history and it's literature. So I know that, and that's why I have to look back in time to contextualize and understand and be in peace with what's happening now. But all the way back to 500, our dear friend Heraclitus told us that change is the only constant. So these new technologies are not going away. The choice that we have is what is going to be our relationship to them. If you are a designer, if you work with designers, if you are someone who hires designers, or if you have an influence in how hiring decisions about designers are being made, you have a really, really important responsibility here. Okay? You have a responsibility to act intentionally and consider the ethical implications of those hires. Who are you putting in seats of influence in your organization? If they all look the same, if they all come from the same background, if they all have the same beliefs, you are not using that responsibility wisely. You must look carefully at these decisions. And when I say this, okay, I think everybody would nod and smile and say, yeah, we have to do that, but look, this is a can that cannot keep getting kicked down the road. Put concrete metrics in place. If your recruiting team does not have someone dedicated to diversity and inclusion hires, rethink it, right? And change the way you interview too, right? So I want to leave you with some tips. I know we're almost running out of time, but when I say take diversity seriously, I mean that. Like, have somebody that is on your recruitment team that is dedicated to hiring diverse designers. And this is not easy. I know that when you need to hire fast, it's not always the easiest thing to do. That's why it has to be a pipeline. You have to be cultivating relationships. You have to be finding ways to mentor and support these designers in their journeys. Rather than asking about experiences, I would really encourage you in your interview process, ask about values. This is going to tell you a lot more about who someone is, how they learn, how they contribute, and what are they going to work toward on your team. Get really present to the personal impact that you have as a leader and to the impact that your team has. It's very easy for us to go through life on autopilot, not recognizing that the decisions we make have consequences for people around us. So get really present to your impact. Ask people around you, how do you perceive me? What is it like working with my team? What is it like the work that we've done? And last, I would just say, create a culture where when you are defending design decisions, you're including considerations of human and planet-centric design as well as adoption and revenue. There are a lot of companies with very rigorous design departments that ask good questions about what was the ROI of this case, or what was your adoption percentage, or how did revenue increase? Great. Ask them also about ethical considerations. Who used this? Who didn't this work for? What would you do differently next time? Okay, make that part of your culture. I'm going to leave you with that. I don't know, do we have time for questions, or okay, any questions? Everybody's convinced. Can you give an
example of a value question for an interviewee?
Yeah, absolutely. Maria's on my team, so she's going to laugh when I say this, because I ask this for everybody that I interview to join. I simply ask them, what makes you who you are? What are your core values? And be okay with the fact that people are probably going to need to stop and think about that for a beat. That's not a very common question to get asked. And be prepared to dig a little deeper. If they don't know how to answer it, you can ask something like, what's a common thread that you look for in your friendships, in your working partnerships, in your romantic relationships? What are those qualities that are non-negotiable for you? You can also ask questions about how those values show up. So I had a young woman that I hired a little over a year ago, and she told me that her core value was adaptability. I said, okay, great, that's a really good interview answer, but like, what does that look like in your life, right? She's like, well, I trained to be a flight attendant. I'm from Colombia. I trained to be a flight attendant, and I went and lived in Australia for a year, and I met my husband, and he's Brazilian, so we moved back to Brazil. So now I've taught myself English and Portuguese as well as Spanish, and I'm going to make a pivot in my career to work in technology because that's where I see I can make more of an impact. So ask for those examples and really dig, but be comfortable also with silence in interviews. Like, give people that space to talk and to think and reflect about what makes them who they are. I would really caution against dwelling on the experiences, right? Those experiences may be great, but not everybody has access to the same experiences. I'll give an example. I've led a very privileged life, but one privilege I did not have was socioeconomic advantages growing up, right? So I didn't have those internships. I didn't have a portfolio when I graduated high school. I had a Dairy Queen job experience. So don't ask people like, what have you done? What big companies have you worked for? What experiences? What titles? Ask them, what makes you you? What are you excited about learning? What are the traits that you know you can bring to the table? Be that person that maybe gives them an opportunity to bring those traits to play and let them leverage that. They may not have had that before. So it's a lot more about who they have potential to become versus what's been handed to them along the way. Thank you. Great question. Others? How many of you are designers or work with designers in the room? I'm curious. Okay, cool. Did any of this resonate or anything felt like wrong or you'd want to posit a different perspective? Yeah.
Part of your, thank you. I'm just curious, first, thank you so much for this, it was awesome. I'm curious, as you're building companies and going, how do you ensure to create a culture of innovation and kind of bringing these things in as well as obviously just doing your day job? Like what?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that I'm very fortunate because I work in a consultancy. So that's kind of the way that we build business, right, is helping people think differently or break outside of the box. And there are a lot of people that become addicted to the agency or consultancy life for that reason. Like, you're constantly being asked to throw away your presuppositions. What worked for client A is not going to work for client B, is not going to work for client C. So I think in this world, we're kind of forced to it. But I would say if you're in-house at a company, if you run a creative team or you're embedded, look for those outside perspectives. Carve out time in your schedule that you read or study or go to conferences or have a mentor that's not in the company. It's very easy to become, my company's Avenue Code, right? I've been there for 6.5 years. It's very easy to become a good Avenue coder, but not a good design leader. It's easier and easier to know how to work in this context, in this little world. So intentionally put yourself out there, find ways to broaden the perspective. If you don't work with consultants because they're going to shake things up. They're going to bring new perspective that you may not have in-house. They're going to challenge the way that you're thinking, but don't stop with your own education. Read podcasts, conferences, whatever that is. You've got to find those ways to keep bringing something new to the table. Take a design thinking course if you haven't, right? That's a really, and no matter what discipline you're in, you can be in sales or executive leadership, or you can be an engineer, but design thinking is going to ask you to do one thing, which is set aside everything that you thought you knew and focus on the user. And that's why, we call ourselves dot design. The dot that's what happens at the end of a sentence. That's a breath, that's a beat. That's before something completely new that we don't know what it is. That's unwritten. So to take that beat, like find a ways to just build those beats in where you're like, okay, that was that, and now anything can be possible. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So we like to think that performance and design can go hand in hand, but there's obviously
Yeah.
a trade-off. So I was curious what your perspective is on where you make that stop with, okay, we can't have that design because it's not gonna be a good product. It's not gonna run as fast. It's not gonna, whatever the reason may be.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question to ask, particularly with innovation, right? Because it is a lot of untested and new and experimental. So I think there are important questions to ask yourself about what you're building and who is it for before you get ever into the pixel pushing side of that. And I think most designers, even if they're like graphic or visual or motion designers that are really like building the actual design that you're looking at, they want to be connected back to those strategic conversations about how are we going to measure success and who is the user and what are their concerns. So I think that design, it's got to be actually about the performance. The designer should be the voice in the room that's saying, did we test this? Did somebody get a feedback on this yet? And it doesn't have to be we stop for 3 months and do research. It can be let's take 5 days, bring in 7 users, and get a consensus about how this is performing. Is that what you meant by performance, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's all around the prioritization,
Yeah,
functionality, and performance.
yeah,
And how closely, I mean, I would think that have a great design.
But if the product's crap, no one's gonna use it, right? 'Cause it
yeah,
doesn't work.
yeah, exactly.
So how closely are those
Yeah.
in terms of priorities?
Right, and I think that's where you've seen a really big movement, like in the last 15 years particularly, to have design migrate upstream. If design is in the room when you're making the decision about what is the product, that becomes a very different conversation versus we've all decided and we know how we're going to build it, can you make it pretty? Like, yeah, we can come up with something gorgeous, right? But if we don't know why or who or how, it might be pretty, but it's not going to be effective. And design, to be true design, it's got to be both. It's got to be effective and it's got to be winsome and aesthetically captivating. Yeah. Thank you.